Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Be Bold America. I'm Mike Clancy, substituting for Jill Cody. Our program today is How California Works, Building Democracy in the Golden State, Part 2. Why is this program a Part 2? Well, as the mayor of Santa Cruz, Fred Keeley, likes to say, wishing that things worked one way or another is not the same as knowing how things work. How do we really get to know something? Well, we have to study it in some detail. So getting to know our state of California and how we may participate and make a real difference in its ongoing evolution will take more than one interview. It will take a short podcast series, and this is part 2 of that series. And the wonderful book, How California Works, Building Democracy in the Golden State, by Jonathan Vankin, is the basis for this podcast series. The book takes a deep and wide look at every aspect of California government, and it shares true stories about how California is leading the world toward a better future, from protecting women's and voters' rights to building a sustainable energy infrastructure. How California Works, Building Democracy in the Golden State, acknowledges that the state is confronting a myriad of problems, yet individuals and organizations throughout California are working hard to make our state a better, fairer, and safer place. We have big things to do today. Our bold interview guest today is the author of How California Works, Jonathan Vankin. Jonathan is a senior writer for California Local and an award-winning journalist whose writing has appeared in such publications as the New York Times Magazine, Wired, Salon, LA Weekly, and many others. Jonathan is also the author of 4 nonfiction books, including Conspiracies, Cover-Ups, and Crimes, the first comprehensive journalistic investigation of America's conspiracy theory underground, foreshadowing the current state of socio-political affairs by 2 decades, and Close to Zero, a full account of Donald Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Jonathan Vankin has also written comic books, TV screenplays, and even the book for a hit off-Broadway musical, Forever Dusty, about the great British pop star Dusty Springfield. He has appeared on such networks as CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, Fox, the BBC, and the CBC, and has made numerous appearances on various radio stations and podcasts. Welcome to Be Bold America, Jonathan.
Well, thanks for having me on again.
Jonathan, to start, tell us why every Californian needs to be informed on the material in your book. Why do we need to know how our state works? What's in it for us?
I think it's something that as we've seen on a national scale lately, it's something that everybody needs to know about their own state and their own country, which is how the government works, how the society works, how government agencies interact. I mean, I think we have a lot of deeply rooted stereotypes of government in this country, a lot of people who just think, oh, all government is bad, it doesn't accomplish anything, or maybe on the other hand, you have people who think the government provides the answers to everything. The truth is the government is and this is especially true, I think, in California, the government is a very large, complex system, a machine, but a machine made up of people and laws. And, its purpose isn't to rob from you, it isn't to steal from you, though there certainly are people within the system who might be doing those things, unfortunately. But its purpose really is to make our massive society livable and a place where people can get along and be able to live and pursue their dreams and hopefully have some degree of prosperity. And that's really the purpose of it. It doesn't accomplish that often in the greatest of ways, but I do think, the intentions are there. But we need to know more about how these things work. What are the government agencies? How do they interact? What are they doing for me or against me at any given time? And I think, I think we just, as a society, we really have to get over our dangerously simplistic way of looking at how things work. And I think, in California, that's obviously the state I was writing about here and the state where I live, but it's just a great example for the country for many reasons, but one of them just being that it's the biggest state and the most complicated state and kind of the most varied and diverse state. And I just think that people if you can understand California, you can probably understand the rest of the country in a way.
Yeah.
And that's what we really need to be doing. There's just such a dangerous lack of understanding, and it's almost willful ignorance on the part of at least half the country.
Yeah,
probably more than that too.
Yeah, I get that, and I definitely agree. That's very good. Jonathan, as you point out in the book, California is by far the most heavily regulated state, with nearly 400,000 regulations on the books compared with a national average of only 135,000 regulations per state. These regulations, which have the force of law, are created by more than 200 state agencies. Is California's heavy reliance on regulation a good thing or a bad thing? And how does it affect people's lives?
Well, I think it depends on the specific regulations you're talking about. I think one of the reasons why California has so many more regulations than your average state or any other state is that we're the biggest. And as I just said in my previous answer, we're the biggest, we're the most complicated. There's just the most stuff going on here. And that's not meant to brag about California or try to be a booster of it. It's just a stone cold fact. And when you have that much activity going, that much business activity, that much government activity, things need to be regulated. Yeah, and that's very important, I think. And I think, again, this is another area where I think so many people have this knee-jerk reaction, and it's understandable. I mean, if you're in business, you don't want to be regulated. You don't want the government telling you what to do. But there are things that need to happen, and people and businesses need to abide by certain rules and regulations that just to make them work and just to make them function in society.
Yeah,
so I can overall.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I understand that. I think I've read that California has the 8th largest economy in the world. So that's a huge amount of business activity.
It might even be more than that.
Might even be more than that. Okay.
I think it might be the 5th. I mean, wow. We're a huge, wealthy, complicated state. Yeah. And a far from perfect state, right? But at the same time, I think that the idea of government regulation isn't in and of itself a bad thing. I think the intentions can be good. Now, having said that, I'm sure there's a lot of regulations, and of the 400,000, I don't think I could name all 400,000. Not that many, but I would say that I'm sure it varies. There's a lot of regulations that are probably well intended, but don't really work. Yeah, there's some regulations that are maybe just bureaucratic redundancy and could probably be eliminated. But on the whole, I do. It's just my belief that we need sensible government regulations of almost every business. And I think that I don't know if you plan to ask a question about Silicon Valley later, but I'm just going to jump ahead and say that I think one of the areas where we see the harmful effect of government sort of delaying and dragging its feet rather on regulating industry is with technology. And I think, for instance, you see, we see a lot of hand-wringing these days, and maybe rightly so, about how, just to name one example of technology, social media has really changed our landscape in this country, changed our political landscape, changed the way people think, created this, so-called loneliness epidemic that you can see the Surgeon General writing about. Yep. It didn't really have to be that way. I think if government sensibly had stepped in, had tried to study the issue, tried to have some foresight on it, and tried to establish some sort of common sense regulations as to how this new industry should behave, I think we probably could have avoided a lot of the problems that have been caused by social media. And I don't mean to just to single out social media. I think that could apply to, you see it happening right now with artificial intelligence.
Absolutely. I was going to mention that one. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, now is the time to do some, to formulate some sensible regulations for how we want this technology to proceed. Sure. It's not, in my mind, AI is not an inherently bad thing. It's a tool like anything else. I agree. It can be used for very bad things, but it can also be a great boon. But if we just let it run wild, I can pretty much guarantee we're not going to like the result.
It'll run wild. Okay, so Jonathan, you also talk about the fourth branch of government in the book, namely the people of California that vote in elections, and the three powers they wield beyond that of just electing public officials, specifically the powers of initiative, recall, and referendum. How unique is this direct form of democracy to California, and what has been the impact of it over the state's history?
Well, I mean, it's not that unique. I think the extent to which it exists in California is probably greater than in any other state, and not every state has it by any means.
Yeah.
I think, just trying to remember off the top of my head here, I think there's about 21 states that have an initiative process, which in other words means that citizens can propose new laws and get them on the ballot through a petition process, meaning that the legislature doesn't have to pass all the laws, that citizens themselves can formulate laws. So I think there's about 20 other states, maybe 21, that have that process. I think it might be about 20 or 19 also have a recall process. We saw that about, maybe 10 years ago or so in Wisconsin, where they tried to recall the Scott Walker, this very sort of anti-labor, right-wing governor.
Yep.
Failed in recalling him. But so, they do have recalls in some other states, but it's not a majority. And I think in California, it's been used probably more. I would guess, I don't have data right in my fingertips, but I would guess it's been used here more than anywhere else. And certainly, California has the largest, longest constitution of any government entity in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is that constitutional amendments are passed frequently, in fact, every year, it seems like, by ballot initiative.
Mm-hmm.
And we're amending and adding to our Constitution here all the time.
Right.
So through the people's own initiative. And again, that can be a great thing. Now, at the same time, that has been often co-opted by big business interests, big money interests, and that sort of thing, because it's not cheap to get these things on the ballot. It's not easy to assemble the right amount of signatures to get something on the ballot.
Yeah.
And of course, it takes a lot of money to promote your cause to the voters,
sure,
who of course have to approve your ballot measure, whatever it is. So it's a lot of money involved in this. And as with anything in politics, where you have a lot of money, things can go awry
sure,
quick.
Sure.
So I think that's been something that's happened in California quite a bit.
Okay.
But at the same time, I think it's really a fundamental part of our state and a great thing in theory. Not always in practice, but at least in theory, I think it is a fantastic thing to have, what they call direct democracy.
Yeah, that does sound good.
The people themselves can make the laws. They can, obviously we can elect our public officials, but we can also recall them before their term is up if we are really upset with them for one reason or another.
Sure.
Or we can try to anyway. So, and of course we also have the referendum process, which is we can repeal laws that have been passed by the legislature or by the people through the same process of ballot measures, which involves, again, petitions and campaigning and all that sort of thing. So it's not unique to California, but I think California is probably the most prolific user of it, and the state has probably been shaped by this direct democracy system.
Sure.
Probably more than any other state in the country, I would venture to say. Yeah,
I kind of get the impression from that, being out in the receiving end of all the advertising that goes on with these things. Well, we're going to take a quick break here. You're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7, 89.5, and 89.7 FM, serving the California Central Coast. Many voices, one station. Listen globally online from the ksqd.org website. Our topic today is How California Works, Part 2, and our bold guest is Jonathan Vankin. Jonathan is a senior writer for California Local, and he is an award-winning journalist whose writings have appeared in such publications as the New York Times Magazine, Wired, Salon, LA Weekly, and many others. He's the author of several books, the latest of which is How California Works, Building Democracy in the Golden State. Learn more about Jonathan Vankin at jonathanvankin.net. That's JONATHANVANKIN.net. And read more about California at californialocal.com. I'm your host, Mike Clancy.
Did you know that 6 corporations own 90% of the media in the United States? Isn't it about time we own some too? KSQD 90.7 FM. Your community radio station, your voice, your concerns. Go to www.ksqd.org to get involved and support locally owned grassroots community media. KSQD K-Squid, KSQD FM.
Hello, K-Squid listeners. I'm Tom Hartman, and each weekday at 4 p.m., I bring you a different perspective on the news than you're likely to hear on most media outlets. Please join me on KSQD Santa Cruz, your ink spot on the dial for the Tom Hartman program, heard now for the first time ever in the Monterey Bay area at 90.7 FM, weekdays at 4 p.m. That's progressive talking conversation with me, Tom Hartman, weekdays at 4 p.m. on KSQD 90.7 FM. Tag, you're it.
We're back. Would you like a friend to hear this interview on How California Works Part 2 and the continuing series on this topic? Be Bold America is available as a podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe for free or listen to the show at Be Bold America's homepage on the ksqd.org website. Also, KSQD is proud to announce that we now have a mobile app so that you can listen to your favorite KSQD shows anytime from your smartphone. You can download it from your favorite app store or visit ksqd.org/KSQD app. Now, Jonathan, I'm pretty sure that everyone in California who follows the news has heard about the California Coastal Commission. The coast is so important to the state, and as you put it in the book, the Coastal Commission is the guardian of the coast. How did the Coastal Commission come about? What is its jurisdiction, and how successful has it been in protecting our coast?
Well, I think the Coastal Commission is, as I say in the book, is the reason that California's coast is not looked at like the Jersey Shore or South Florida, where if you go to the beach, you're sunbathing in the shadow of, skyscrapers, condominium complexes.
Been there, done that. I'm from Florida.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, really? Yeah. I visit there a lot, and I like it there, but at the same time, like most of the beaches are there's a lot of development.
It's wall-to-wall condos pretty much everywhere.
It's wall-to-wall condos. And the reason that it's not this way in California is the California Coastal Commission. I mean, there really is no other reason. So the commission actually sort of got its impetus. It was back in the 50s and early 60s when, the Atoms for Peace initiative that President Eisenhower at the time had sort of come up with, started and was trying to kickstart the nuclear power industry for peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And I guess it was PG&E wanted to build a nuclear reactor, a nuclear power plant in Sonoma County along the coast there. And the local community was not happy about this, and they managed to, I guess, dig a pretty gigantic hole where a reactor was supposed to go. But the local activism ended up stopping it. And it's really kind of raised awareness about what is about to happen to the California coast, not just in Sonoma County, but everywhere. Mm-hmm. So up and down the state. So that really was the impetus for the Coastal Commission. Now, it didn't actually, come along for a while. Yeah. There was more incursions. There was condo developments and that sort of thing that were constantly being fought. And again, we were talking about ballot initiatives. I think it eventually took a ballot initiative to form the Coastal Commission. Mm-hmm. It was Proposition 20, and that led to the Coastal Act of 1976, which prioritized public access to the beaches mm-hmm. and other coastal areas, so that these beaches could remain with our beaches, our coastline. Yeah. Recreational beaches, obviously, but just our coastline could remain relatively free of development and be a public resource that people could access. Yeah, so,
access is a key word there, because a lot of people don't really understand how precious that access is, because if it's not sort of mandated, it can go away really fast.
It can go away, very fast. And I think in a lot of other places, a lot of other coastal states that do not have this type of protection, people find that. You got a lot of beaches and you just can't go to them.
Can't get to them. That's right.
You can't get there because you're not allowed.
Right.
Whereas in California, obviously there's some private land and that sort of thing, but basically the public is required to have access to the coast, to beaches and other coastal areas. I think its jurisdiction goes back about 1,000 feet from the coast. I mean, I can't recall all the exact numbers, but I think it's about that. Up and down the coast, mm-hmm. and in certain other areas, it might vary a little bit. But that's basically it. It just it doesn't protect just the coast. It goes back to prevent coastal development.
Right.
back from the coast, but could still impede people's access to it and impede people's use of it with unsightly developments or environmentally unsound developments that damage the coast and that sort of thing.
So, Jonathan, every county in California apparently has a local agency formation commission, a LAFCO.
Yes.
I'm guessing LAFCO. I'm guessing very few Californians know much about LAFCOs, yet they are extraordinarily important and powerful. Tell us more.
Yeah, I certainly didn't know a lot about LAFCOs before I started researching this chapter of the book. It's definitely my favorite acronym of all the California agencies, LAFCO. But as I say in the book, the LAFCOs are no joke. They have a lot of power. But essentially what their power is to define the boundaries of cities and other such governmental entities. So, if you're starting a new city or a new district, a special district, a community service district within a county, you have to go to the local agency formation commission and set the boundaries there. And, it doesn't always work. Sometimes they don't approve them, and that sort of thing. But that sounds like a very sort of mundane task, like, the boundaries of a city. It's like, so you're just drawing a bunch of lines. But it determines really who you're paying your taxes to, what you're paying your taxes for. Does the water district overlap with the fire district? That sort of thing. I mean, the LAFCO controls all that in every county. And of course, also, there's not a lot of new cities being started lately, but there are occasionally. There's a new one that applies, and that's up to the LAFCO too. So to decide what the boundaries of that city are. So it really has a lot to do with what type of taxes that you're paying, what your local regulations are going to be, what your local government is going to be like. The LAFCO, which is a board that consists of various members. I can't remember the exact distribution, but in each county, it's like a couple from the Board of Supervisors, there's a couple citizens, and some other government. I think there's a couple appointees as well. So, it's a commission it's not like some sort of shadowy thing. I mean, it's made up of public officials and citizens, but they really do have a lot of power, and it's something that people really need to know about. And need to learn about, because it's the type of thing that you could be very surprised. It kind of struck me in the book. Another governmental entity that may be unfamiliar to most citizens is the Joint Powers Authority, JPA. As you point out in the book, JPAs have the power to levy taxes, accumulate debt, acquire land, and construct buildings, all without answering to voters or elected officials. Tell us about JPAs and the difference between horizontal JPAs and vertical JPAs. Well, a JPA, like I say, it's a Joint Powers Authority, and basically what it means is when there's two government agencies that agree to work together to accomplish a particular goal. Like, I don't know, could be, building a transit system that's going between, say, two counties, or, building a museum that's going to serve, some larger community, some things like that. So the Joint Powers Authority has a lot of the same powers as a government does, but what they don't, which is to levy taxation and things like that, and to issue bonds, things that normally need voter approval, but in the case of a Joint Powers Authority, they don't. The JPAs can just do it. They are necessary, and they definitely make government a lot more efficient in some ways, but they also can be, and as I point out in the book, and as some grand jury investigations in the state have shown, they can be sinkholes for abuse and waste and fraud and all sorts of terrible things. That doesn't mean they're bad necessarily. It just means, again, they're a tool that can be abused. So the ones that are more dangerous in that respect are what they call the vertical Joint Powers Authorities, and that means when you have a JPA that is a collaboration between two agencies, I should say, within one governmental entity. And you saw that a lot. It used to be in the era of the redevelopment agencies, which ended, I think, in 2012. But for a long time, almost every major city had a redevelopment agency. And that redevelopment agency could also form JPAs with other agencies in the city. And once that happened, it gave them almost unlimited power to do whatever they want in terms of development, taking land, claiming eminent domain, that sort of thing.
What about transparency?
And there's no real accountability. There's no real transparency or accountability.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. They don't have any reporting requirements or transparency requirements.
And they have public records requirements, but because they're contained within a single government entity, it's really that other entity that's answerable to the public, and the JPA itself can kind of operate in the shadows. Now, the horizontal JPAs are a bit safer because the reason they're so-called horizontal means they are collaborations between two completely separate government entities. So if San Jose wants to collaborate with, Mountain View or something, or whatever some adjacent cities are up there on a particular project, whatever that is. Maybe it's a road system or a light rail system, whatever. They will work together and they'll form a JPA. I guess you'd say the check and balance there is that each one of those entities can just pull out at any time if they see it going wrong. So, if one of those two cities decides, hey, this isn't really working for us and we're seeing like some waste and corruption here, they can just end it.
I see.
Whereas the problem with the vertical JPA is that can't really happen because you have these two agencies that are essentially part of the same government that are forming this JPA and sort of accumulating extra power that they really arguably should not have.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to a topic which is certainly a hot one in recent years, and that is immigration. Your book provides a really good historical perspective on immigration in California and the important role it has played in building the state. Can you give our listeners a quick summary of how immigration policy in California has evolved since the beginning of the 20th century?
Yeah, it's evolved a lot. It used to be, as a lot of immigration policy was in this country, extremely discriminatory.
Yes.
And particularly against, in this state, Chinese immigrants who were subject to, actually, there was a law called the Chinese Exclusion Act that basically banned Chinese people, except under very specific circumstances, from entering the state at all. And, of course, later it became immigrants from Mexico who were subject to those sorts of restrictions.
Right.
A lot of that has changed. Obviously, a lot of it has opened up. And I think it's really federal immigration policy now, as we hear about in the news pretty much every day, that governs these sorts of things. We don't quite have the level of discrimination that we used to have in this state, clearly. But it's kind of a shameful history and dates back really to the gold rush when you had a lot of immigrants from China and other places coming in for the same reason that people came to California from all over the country, which is to strike gold.
Opportunity,
and of course, very, very few of them ever did.
Right.
So they found themselves in a tough situation and needing money and being sort of drained on the system around them, and were discriminated against and often were expelled or deported.
Yes. Well, hold that thought. We're going to have to take a quick break here. You're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7, 89.5, and 89.7 FM, serving the California Central Coast. Many voices, one station. Listen globally online from the ksqd.org website. I'm your host, Mike Clancy, and I'm interviewing Jonathan Vankin, who is the author of 4 nonfiction books, in addition to How California Works, including Conspiracies, Cover-Ups, and Crimes, the first comprehensive journalistic investigation of America's conspiracy theory underground, foreshadowing the current state of socio-political affairs by 2 decades, and Close to Zero, a full account of Donald Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Learn more about Jonathan Vankin at jonathanvankin.net and read more about our state of California at californialocal.com. We'll be right back after Jim Hightower's commentary titled, The Moderate Milquetoast Democratic Party Loses Another Big One. I'm your host, Mike Clancy.
The morning after the election, a social media pundit expressed amazement that Democrat Kamala Harris had lost, noting that America is enjoying an objectively strong economy. Indeed, the data show impressive job growth, rising wages, slowing inflation, etc., all indicators of a solid economy. Nearly every pundit hailed this as meaning Harris's campaign could glide on rising prosperity, while focusing her main message on what a dangerous bumbling buffoon Trump is. The problem is that objective economic data often deceives. For example, consider economist John Kenneth Galbraith's sad tale of the 6-foot-tall statistician who drowned crossing a stream with an average depth of 2 feet. Millions of Americans are drowning in today's economy. Even workaday people with college degrees are struggling to make ends meet and feeling pessimistic about their future. Happy talk by economists, pundits, and politicians doesn't pay the rising bills for rent, childcare, groceries, insurance, medicines, etc. Everything is moving out of reach, except a protest vote. About half of Trump voters say high prices were, quote, the largest factor in their vote. Democratic Party officials were dazzled by the soaring Dow Jones average, ignoring the Doug Jones average, which showed that Doug and Donna are struggling, anxious, angry, and even open to a bull-goose demagogue blustering that he'll fix the rigged system on day one. This is Jim Hightower saying, few of these hard-hit men and women actually believe in, agree with, trust, or even like Trump, nor are they stuck on supporting him. But they will be unless and until some progressive party decides to side with grassroots people in an unabashed fight for economic fairness and social justice. To help push in that direction, go to workingfamilies.org. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you subscribers to Jim Hightower's Lowdown on Substack. Find us at jimhightower.substack.com.
Welcome back. Our topic today is How California Works, Part 2. And our guest is Jonathan Vankin. Jonathan has appeared on such networks as CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, Fox, the BBC, and CBC, and has made numerous appearances on various radio stations and podcasts. And today we are so excited to have him here on KSQD. Jonathan, before we continue, would you like to comment on what we just heard from Jim Hightower?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I thought it was interesting. I can't say I completely agree with his perspective. I think a lot of the problem, I think really has to do with how Republicans are just a lot better at controlling the media narrative. And they're better at it because they have been building a machine for doing so for decades now, at least 2-3 decades. And Democrats have just ignored that. They haven't really tried to do that. They haven't really tried to build their own system of networks or network of radio stations. I mean, you look how far back this goes. I mean, in the 80s, you had Rush Limbaugh, through the 90s, too, and then, of course, Fox News. And now there's this entire ecosystem that I think has just created this intractable army of voters who will support anybody that this system tells them to support. Now, Trump, I think, has a sort of weirdly unique appeal, and I'm not really sure why. I can't explain it. I, like a lot of people, find him to be absolutely a repulsive, horrible human being. But I can't deny that for at least some people, he has some kind of charisma. And there is a weird sort of cult of Trump made up of voters who really only want to vote for Trump. They don't really even care about the issues. They don't care about anything. They just want to vote for Trump.
You can see that for sure, Yeah.
But I think that for Democrats to compete going forward on a long-term basis, they've got to do more than just sort of talk to the working class or that sort of thing. Not that that's not necessary. It is, obviously. But I think Democrats are stuck on this paradigm of persuasion. And they seem to think that they can, because, Democratic policies are more popular, they're better, they help more people. There's really no doubt about all that. But they don't convince people.
We're losing the messaging, apparently.
Yeah, losing the messaging war. But it's not just like, what was the messaging war in this campaign? It's that we can't win the messaging war because we don't have the apparatus to do so. It's like saying, we have the bullets that are just as big as the bad guys' bullets, but we don't have any guns to fire them. So it doesn't matter. So I think what the Democrats really have to do is start building that type of machine and realize that voters' minds need to be cultivated. They need to be shaped over long periods of time. And that's just showing up and knocking on someone's door and saying, hey, guess what? Our candidate wants to give small businesses a $50,000 subsidy. I mean, that's a great, I'm totally in favor of that. But most of these people, even if they say, oh, that's great, I'm going to vote for her, you're going to forget that They're going to forget they even said that by the time they get to the ballot box. So I just think this model of persuasion doesn't work and needs to be changed.
Yeah, well, good perspective on it. I appreciate that. Back to the book. As you note in the book, California is America's food-producing powerhouse and the fifth largest supplier of food and other agricultural products in the world. About half of America's farm workers live in California, and about 75% of them are undocumented immigrants. If all the undocumented farm workers in California were suddenly deported, as Donald Trump would like to do, what would be the impact on California agriculture and food prices across America?
Well, I think obviously it would be a massive calamity that I don't think we'd ever recover from. And it wouldn't just be California, though obviously we take the brunt of it because we have such a high degree of, high percentage of poorly paid, undocumented workers who prop up our agricultural economy. And our agricultural economy props up the country's agricultural economy. So if you suddenly deported those people, or even a good percentage of them, you're just going to cause a massive disaster. And there's going to be less food for people. The prices of the food that there is going to be higher.
Yeah.
It's just a plan that's just an obvious and complete disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah.
So the fact that people are even thinking about that this should happen is just absolutely mind-boggling. And I mean, if you took, as I mentioned in the book, like if you took away California's food supply from the country, mainly what we'd be eating as Americans are grains. So many other things come from California. There would be many fewer fruits, many fewer vegetables. We'd be eating a lot of rice, a lot of wheat, stuff like that. It would just be a much different way of eating, and it would be very expensive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, this supposed plan of mass deportations, we don't even need to get into the, sort of extreme immorality and inhumanity of it.
Yeah.
Just looking at it from a purely economic perspective, it's just a complete disaster.
Yeah.
So I can't, it's one of those things that I can't even really get my head around as to how this is an issue that people are actually talking about. The only sort of viable theory I've heard is that people just don't understand what it means. That they love the sound of mass deportations, but they're really just thinking about the border. They're thinking, we have this crisis at the border. If we can just deport everyone who's come across there illegally, everything will be better.
Yeah,
but that's not what they're talking about. They're talking literally about, this guy who's the nominee for Trump's, was it Homeland Security? Yeah, whatever it is, who's going to be in charge of all this, allegedly, is already talking about sending the army into New York City to go into people's homes and pull them out of their home. I mean, it's absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and you have to wonder
I'm not looking forward to that.
Who's going to harvest all our food? Let's face it.
Well,
we depend on those people.
Yeah, we do, and we need a better system for them. They need better living conditions and better housing and better everything, which will make the food supply a bit more expensive. There's no doubt about it, but I think everybody will benefit from that. Whereas if we just get rid of them, things are going to get incredibly more expensive. There's going to be less food, and our economy will probably take a giant nosedive, and the countries will, too.
Absolutely. Seems pretty obvious. Jonathan, one of the key demographic shifts that occurred in America after World War II was the rise of the suburbs. And nowhere was that more apparent than in California. Unfortunately, housing policies that perpetuated or even amplified racial segregation came along with this suburbanization. Can you give our listeners a brief historical summary of how that played out in California post-World War II?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it wasn't really, I don't think, that different from the rest of the country, where suburbs were designed for white people specifically. And some of them, now in California, I don't think they necessarily had such explicit sort of whites-only policies as they did in places like Levittown, New York. But effectively, it was the same thing for these subdivisions. They were designed to get middle-class and more prosperous white people out of the inner city and into these suburbs, sprawling suburbs. Now, I should also add that we talk about suburbs. No one really knows what a suburb is. And the federal government, which actually, will take census and ask people where they live. Do you live in the suburbs? Do you live in the city? There is no definition, no federal legal definition of what a suburb is.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a nebulous thing when we talk about suburbia. And some suburbs aren't even outside of cities. I mean, you think the word suburban means it's below a city, outside of a city. But, I mean, there's plenty of suburbs, especially in Los Angeles, where I'm located right now, where most of the city is suburbs, even though it's the city.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's definitely an interesting phenomenon. It was promoted. It was really designed by federal government through various subsidies for returning GIs from World War II, as well as through the New Deal, Federal Housing Authority. Really created suburbia very deliberately.
Yeah.
And a lot of, and it's really not that different from a lot of other sort of urban planning and regional planning policies, where very often, I mean, the famous architect of New York City, Robert Moses, would design the roadways so that it was very difficult for mass transit to get to the beaches, right? Mm-hmm. So that meant generally people who didn't have a lot of money, didn't have their own cars, couldn't go to the beach. Yep. And that, in those days, especially, it meant it was mainly white people who went to the beach. So this is not a unique thing. It's a really sort of unfortunate and shameful part of how our state and country has developed. Mm-hmm. But I do think we're making progress in that respect. Yeah. Certainly far from perfect, but it's not what it was in the 1950s.
Yeah, definitely. As you discuss in the book, defense spending has been a huge driver of the California economy ever since the beginning of the Cold War. And defense spending played a significant role in building Silicon Valley in the early days. How important is defense spending today in California, and in what sectors and regions is it mostly concentrated?
Well, it's still really important, even though it's down from its peak. I don't think California is anymore like the number one recipient of defense dollars, but it's definitely high up there still. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's in Los Angeles and of course Silicon Valley still. I mean, anywhere you have technology, anywhere you're building things like airplanes, aviation, the huge parts of that are defense dollars. Yeah. And plus we have a lot of military bases here.
Yes,
and that's
definitely.
Defense spending also. So a lot of defense spending goes to people. Probably not enough to support the people in our military.
Yeah, that's true.
But the money does go to them as well, and to support these bases. I forget exactly how many military bases there are in California, but it's a lot.
Quite a few, and some of them are very unique as well.
Exactly. Some are very unique, and so and of course the people, the military personnel who live on those bases and around those bases, they go out in the community, they spend their money in California, and they buy California products, et cetera, et cetera. So I think defense spending is still a very important part of the economy here.
Okay, very good. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break here. If you are just joining us, I'm Mike Clancy, and my guest today is Jonathan Vankin. Jonathan is a senior writer for California Local and an award-winning journalist whose writings have appeared in such publications as the New York Times Magazine, Wired, Salon, LA Weekly, and many others. And we are discussing his most recent book, How California Works. You can learn more about Jonathan at jonathanvankin.net and read more about your state and county at californialocal.com. And you can subscribe for free to their Monterey County or Santa Cruz County newsletters. You are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7, 89.5, and 89.7 FM, serving the California Central Coast. Many voices, one station. I'm your host, Mike Clancy.
When you hear Boat Cruise by Thundercat, you know it's time for the Sunday dinner with DJ Dupsy here on K-Squid. Join us on November 17th from 6 to 7 p.m. Our guest will be Dr. Khalid White, and he's going to talk to us about his 3 E's: education, empowerment, and equity. It's food for thought and food for the soul. So pull up a seat to the table and put your eating pants on for the Sunday dinner here on K-Squid. Many voices, one station.
We're back. Jonathan, I think it's fair to say that many people, me included, think the American justice system is broken, as it seems incapable of moving at a reasonable pace, and too often favors the rich and well-connected. How would you rate the California justice system relative to the overall U.S. system when it comes to responsiveness and fairness?
Well, I think, again, it's kind of hard to rate the whole justice system because the justice system, by and large, is done on a county-by-county basis here, and we've got, 58 counties?
Yeah.
So each county is different. And, the justice system, like all these systems, is incredibly complex. I mean, if you're talking about, for instance, say, sheriffs, there's a lot of sheriffs who are quite problematic. And that's not just a California problem. It's all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
But, the courts in California, I'd say, are probably about average, I would guess. I mean, if it's good or bad, that's sort of up to you. I mean, we have elected judges, of course. And I think always the big problem when you have elected judges is that, it's hard enough to get people to learn about candidates for president and governor and senator. When you're talking about candidates for judge, nobody knows anything. No one knows anything about any of these people.
People don't pay much attention.
If you're not already in the justice system yourself. So, I think it's sort of random how judges are chosen here. I always think it would be better, this is one instance where democracy maybe isn't the best way to pick these judges. Maybe it would be better to have them be appointees, not necessarily for life as they are on the federal level, but maybe for limited terms or something like that, because it seems to me like the type of thing where expertise should come into play. And the judges who are selected should be themselves experts and should be selected by other experts, in my mind, because just having people vote for them is just ineffective. It's just, no one knows who they are.
Yeah.
So why are we asking people to fill out these long ballots with, half a dozen or a dozen judges on every ballot? You don't know a single one of them. So that to me is a big flaw.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's, we're such a big state. We have so many different justice systems that I think it's hard to sort of judge the entire state in one fell swoop.
Yeah.
I do think one thing that's very interesting I wrote about that didn't make it into the book this time around was capital punishment in California.
Yeah.
And we still do have capital punishment here. It's still on the books. The governor, Gavin Newsom, the current governor, though, has declared a moratorium on it. I think there's about 700 or so people.
Wow.
We're on death row actively now in California, and he has, by executive order, declared that at least as long as he's around, none of them will be executed.
Okay.
And the reason for that was that this renewed awareness of wrong people who've been wrongly convicted.
Yeah.
And it's because death row cases are so much more complicated and go on so much longer than other cases. It's also much. The word isn't easier, but it's more. Researchers are more able to determine who on death row has been wrongly convicted.
I see.
And I think the number is about 4% in general nationally.
Yeah.
So Newsom, and I admire him for this. Just said, look, I couldn't sleep at night knowing that if we executed all these people, we'd be executing. I don't know, what is it, like 40, 50, 60 completely innocent people.
Wow, 4% is pretty high. I didn't realize it was that high.
And that's just not acceptable. So, I mean, that's just terrible.
Yeah.
So, I think that's an area in California that needs to be reformed. And I think, for that reason alone, if it was up to me, we probably would not have capital punishment here.
Yeah.
There's just too much, we see the justice system going wrong all the time. Everywhere, not just in California.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about someone's life or death, there's no room for error.
That's
and
right.
I just think we should eliminate that room for error by eliminating capital punishment, if it was up to me.
Jonathan, you also shine a light on the California grand jury system, which is generally not well understood by many. I've often heard the terms criminal grand jury and civil grand jury thrown around, but I've never paid much attention. Please tell our listeners about the difference between these two types of grand juries, how they work, and the roles they play in the California justice system.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was really fascinating to me, too, because the civil grand jury system that exists here, I'm not sure it's exactly unique, but it's not very widespread. Not a lot of other states have this system, which is, again, on a county-by-county basis. So briefly, a criminal grand jury has one function, and that is to hand down indictments. So, that grand jury sits for a certain period of time. It's usually designated by law, and their job is to sit there while prosecutors present their cases and that, so-and-so committed this crime or that crime, and you need to indict him. And they'll either indict him, which they do in most cases, or in very rare cases won't indict him or her. The civil grand jury here in California is something very different. Now, in smaller counties, they overlap. It's the same grand jury doing both functions. But in a lot of counties, I'm not sure exactly the number off the top of my head, but they're two separate entities. And it's a great way for citizens to participate, because the function of the civil grand jury in California is as an investigative body. So what the civil grand jury does is every year puts out a report based on a number of investigations that it has done of really almost anything that a grand jury member can get the other grand jury members to agree to investigate. Sometimes it's requests from the public about something, some function of local government that they think has gone wrong, some type of corruption. I think the one thing that civil grand juries are mandated to investigate is the county prison system. So every year they have to put out a report on the state of the county prison system, and that's a very useful thing to do.
Absolutely.
But other than that, it can be almost anything, almost any topic of public concern or matter of government. Mm-hmm. So, and anybody can sit on these things. You just have to apply and be willing to put in the work. It doesn't really pay. It's a very small stipend, but it's not really much.
Yeah.
So it's essentially volunteer work. But it's really very valuable stuff, and you have pretty broad powers to conduct investigations as a civil grand jury. Yeah, and this is really what we need. I mean, knowledge and information is the foundation of everything. Yeah, and civil grand juries in this state, that's their job.
That's great.
That they don't really have any power. They can't, say they find the sheriff has been taking bribes. Yeah, they might find that, and they have. They don't have any power to get rid of the sheriff. Mm-hmm. What they do have the power to do is put that information out to the public with the credibility of this investigation behind it, and then hopefully the local authorities will then act on it.
Yeah, very good. You talk in the book, of course, you talk about the California education system, and I was struck by how complex it is. You talk about 5 centers of power in the system: the governor, the superintendent of public instruction, the 11-member California Board of Education, the California Department of Education, and, of course, local school boards. Can you give us just a very quick summary of the role of these entities and how they interact?
Well, I mean, it sort of goes down from, the governor and the superintendent of schools to the local school boards and local superintendents. It gets smaller and smaller as it goes down, and you have more localized control of things. I think that's the main thing. But really, it's again, a complicated and often conflict-ridden interaction. I know the governor and the superintendent, who is also an elected official, a statewide elected official. California, just as a brief aside, seems to have a bunch of statewide elected officials, I think more than most states, and the superintendent is one of them. But there's often conflicts between the governor and the superintendent of education in California. I think at one point, Jerry Brown, when he was governor, the second time around, maybe it was the first time, I don't remember, but tried to eliminate that position completely. But it came back. So we have a superintendent now, but the superintendent, has it's sort of like layers of oversight, is what it seems to me, down to that local level. Yeah. But really, most control of education really does come from the local level, from the local school boards, and that's why those school boards are so very, very important. Yes,
and you see a lot of controversy there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy there, but I would hope that people, especially hopefully good people, would want to serve on those boards, because it's a very necessary function.
Yeah, definitely, no doubt about that. You talk about Hollywood and the entertainment industry in the book, and I found it very fascinating how the entertainment industry came to the state, and of course how the studios have evolved over the years. But you end that chapter with a quote I thought was particularly good. You said, quote, "Hollywood may not be the single largest industry in California, but its product, stories, narratives, dreams, makes it the most influential because it not only provides jobs and revenue, it shapes the way we see ourselves," unquote. I thought that was a fantastic statement. Can you expand on this thought for our listeners?
Yeah, well, I think that is really an interesting concept, and I think, the power of stories. This sort of goes back to what I was talking about earlier about the media and politics and what Democrats need to do. It's when I say shaping the narrative, you're really talking about telling stories. Yeah. And that's the business that Hollywood is in. And it's really the most powerful storyteller in the world, really,
Yeah,
and certainly in the country, in terms of how much of its product, how much of its stories through motion pictures and television are consumed, and how those stories and those images and the themes and the concepts in those stories shape our public perception of things and our perceptions of the world and our perceptions of other people. And, because we're a huge country, people, we don't know everybody. So a lot of our social interaction is not real, but it's sort of ersatz interaction that comes through TV and movies and scripted dramas.
Yeah.
Now,
so Jonathan, I'm going to have to leave it there. It was great. I really like that quote. And in these last few minutes, I'm asking you, what do you suggest our audience that we keep doing, stop doing, and start doing to make California an even greater state than it is today? Our future depends on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of keep doing, I'd say keep participating. I think there's a pretty good high level of civic participation in California, so I would encourage people to keep on doing that and do more of it. In terms of stop, I would say stop being ignorant. And this is a problem in the whole country, really.
Yeah.
It's like, stop not paying, it's a double negative, but stop not paying attention to the world around you.
Yeah.
And start trying to learn more about our government, about our people, about other cultures. And I don't even just mean foreign cultures. I mean other ethnicities, other states, other religions than your own. And, I would hope that reading my book that we're talking about, How California Works, would be a great starting point.
I think it would be.
About how things work.
Absolutely.
But there's a lot more than that. You start there and then keep reading, keep studying, just keep learning.
Excellent, Jonathan.
And,
thank you so much. That's great. So, and again, Jonathan, thank you for being our bold and impressive guest today. It's so good to have you back on the show. You've written a brilliant book, and thank you for agreeing to come back to Be Bold America on December 1st to continue creating our podcast series on how California works.
Well, thank you so much.
Great.
I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much for participating today.
All right.
So what's up next on Be Bold America? On December 1st, we will be continuing our series on how California works with Jonathan Vankin about California's democracy being messy, often frustrating, and always requiring compromise. But with enough work and a little smarts, it delivers. Please join us for Part 3 on December 1st at 5 p.m. for How California Works. As a reminder, Be Bold America is available as a podcast. Now you may listen to the show anytime for free by subscribing through your favorite podcast platform. And special thanks to our wonderful and talented program engineer, Eliza James, and our station's tireless program director, Howard Feldstein. You are listening to KSQD, Santa Cruz, and KSQT, Prunedale, many voices, one station. Listen worldwide online at ksqd.org. Stay tuned for Sunday Dinner with DJ Dubsy. And while Jill is away, remember her motto, let your smile change the world, don't let the world change your smile. I'm Mike Clancy, sitting in for Jill Cody, and thank you for listening to Be Bold America. Until next time, keep, stop, start.